Two men stand trial for the exact same crime, in two different courtrooms, on two different days. Same charges. Same law. Similar evidence. Two prosecutors who never spoke to each other. Two judges with the same sentencing guidelines sitting right there on the bench. Yet one man walks away with a lighter sentence than the other. And if you asked either judge exactly why, they might genuinely struggle to give you an answer. Because the difference wasn't the crime. It was the face. That sounds almost too simple to be true. But researchers have found that attractive defendants can receive lighter punishments than less attractive defendants convicted of the same offense. Not because the law gives them special treatment, but because something subtle can happen in the mind of the person making the decision. Psychologists call it the halo effect. And it goes back more than a century. In 1920, psychologist Edward Thorndike was studying something that seemed completely unrelated to attractiveness. He asked military officers to rate their soldiers on different qualities: intelligence, leadership, character, physical appearance, and more. These traits were supposed to be judged separately. But they weren't. Officers who thought a soldier looked physically impressive were also more likely to rate him as intelligent, capable, and good-natured. One positive impression was spilling into everything else. The face, in other words, was quietly influencing the whole person. And Thorndike had just uncovered one of the most powerful shortcuts in the human mind. Thorndike called it the halo effect because it works almost like a glow around one positive trait. You see something good about a person, and somehow, that goodness starts spreading to everything else you believe about them. For decades, it was mostly a fascinating psychological finding. Then, in 1972, 3 researchers decided to test the idea using something people assume shouldn't matter when judging someone's character at all: their appearance. Karen Dion, Ellen Burstede, and Elaine Hatfield showed people photographs of strangers who had been rated as more or less attractive. Then they asked the participants to guess what those people were like. Were they kind? Intelligent? Successful? Trustworthy? The participants had absolutely no information about the strangers' lives. Just their faces. And yet, attractive people were consistently assumed to have better personalities and better lives. The researchers famously summarized the finding as "what is beautiful is good." In other words, the brain wasn't waiting for evidence. It was filling in the blanks. And then things got even more unsettling. Researcher Alexander Todorov studied how quickly people form impressions of unfamiliar political candidates. Participants were shown candidates' faces for an incredibly short amount of time, sometimes just a tenth of a second. Then they were asked one simple question: which candidate looks more competent? Their snap judgments were surprisingly good at predicting the eventual election winner. Think about that for a moment. People were making judgments about who should hold political power before they'd had enough time to consciously think about the person at all. Their brains had already formed an opinion. And they barely knew why. So why does the brain do this? Why are we so quick to look at a face and start guessing what kind of person is behind it? One possible explanation goes all the way back to survival. For most of human history, you couldn't Google someone. You couldn't check their resume, criminal record, references, or social media. If a stranger appeared in front of you, you had very little information, and sometimes only seconds to decide whether getting closer was a good idea. So the brain became incredibly good at making fast guesses. Not necessarily accurate guesses. Just useful ones. Features like symmetry, signs of health, and youth could sometimes provide clues that mattered for survival and reproduction. Over time, the brain may have learned to associate certain visible traits with deeper qualities. The problem is that those shortcuts didn't disappear when the world changed. The stranger standing across from you today isn't necessarily a threat, or a potential mate. They might be a judge, a job applicant, a politician, a doctor, or someone giving a presentation at work. But your brain can still react as if it's trying to make a split-second decision about a stranger in the wild. And that shortcut can end up in places where it really doesn't belong. Courtrooms. Hiring interviews. Voting booths. Boardrooms. Places where the decision actually matters. And here's where the story gets even more interesting. Because the halo effect doesn't always work in favor of attractive people. Researchers have found situations where attractiveness can actually work against someone. It's sometimes called the beauty is beastly effect. Imagine a crime where someone's appearance was part of the weapon, a scam built on charm, manipulation, or seduction. In those situations, attractive defendants can sometimes be judged more harshly than less attractive defendants accused of the same crime. The very trait that usually earns someone the benefit of the doubt suddenly becomes evidence against them. Same face. Same person. Completely different judgment. And that tells us something important. The halo effect was never really about beauty itself. It's about the story our brains build around what we see. We look at a face, make a quick impression, and then unconsciously start filling in the missing pieces. And sometimes, those assumptions can become self-fulfilling. Think about a child who is considered attractive. A teacher might, without realizing it, give that student a little more attention. Expect a little more from them. Be slightly more forgiving when they make a mistake. One interaction doesn't seem like much. But repeat it for years, and those tiny advantages can start to add up. The child may become more confident, more comfortable around people, more willing to speak up, maybe even better at school. And suddenly, the person actually has some of the qualities everyone assumed they had in the first place. That's what makes the halo effect so fascinating. It doesn't just make us misjudge people. Sometimes, our expectations can actually help create the person we thought we were seeing. And the effect doesn't stop with courtrooms, classrooms, or elections. Economist Daniel Hamermesh spent years studying what became known as the beauty premium. When researchers compared attractiveness ratings with people's earnings, they found that more attractive workers often earned more over the course of their careers, even when appearance had little to do with the actual job. Accountants, economists, lawyers, people whose faces have nothing to do with whether they can do the work. And yet, appearance can still influence how they're treated. You can probably recognize smaller versions of this in everyday life. A resume with a photo can create a different impression from the exact same resume without one. A dating profile with a flattering picture can make someone seem smarter, kinder, or funnier before they've even written a message. Even an idea can sound more convincing when it comes from someone we already find attractive or likable. And here's the uncomfortable part. Most people aren't consciously choosing to do this. You don't wake up and think, today I'm going to judge everyone by their face. The halo effect works quietly. It can influence people who genuinely believe they're fair. People who would be offended if you accused them of judging a book by its cover. Which means the best defense isn't pretending the bias doesn't exist. It's noticing when it might be happening. The next time you instantly trust someone, like an idea, or assume a person is competent because they made a great first impression, stop for a second. Ask yourself, what evidence do I actually have? Sometimes, the answer is surprisingly little. Sometimes, all you have is a face. And around that face, your brain has already built an entire story. It decided someone was trustworthy, competent, kind, successful, maybe even dangerous. All before you had enough information to know any of those things. That's the strange power of the halo effect. It doesn't feel like a decision. It feels like intuition. And that's exactly why it's so difficult to notice. Go back to those two men standing trial for the same crime. Same charges. Same evidence. Same law. But somewhere, before either man had finished speaking, the brain of the person judging them may already have started telling a story. Not about the evidence. About the person. And sometimes, all it takes to start that story is a face.